It was a bright and sunny morning in London. The streets around Buckingham Palace were alive with the usual buzz of tourists, eager to witness one of the world's most famous royal traditions, the changing of the guard. People from every corner of the globe had traveled miles, some carrying cameras and selfie sticks, others carrying their children on their shoulders, all hoping to capture a memory of this unique ceremony. Among them were families, school groups, and couples, each drawn by the history and the mystique surrounding the royal guards, who were dressed in their iconic red tunics and tall black bearskin hats. The guards stood perfectly still, their faces expressionless, their eyes straight ahead, seemingly unbothered by the chatter and movement around them. Their posture was impeccable, their uniforms spotless, and the precision of their movements reflected years of training and dedication. Visitors often watched in awe, marveling at the discipline required to remain motionless for hours, even in the heat of summer or the biting cold of winter. The guards were more than just a ceremonial presence, they were symbols of history, duty, and respect. Among the crowd, there were a few visitors who, instead of admiring from a safe distance, decided to test the boundaries. Some leaned in closer than was allowed, thinking they could get the perfect photo. Others whispered jokes or made faces behind the guards' backs, imagining that the guards could not see or react. There were even those who laughed at the strict rules, brushing off the clear signs that warned, "Do not cross the line," or "Keep a safe distance." To them, it was just a game, a harmless way to make their visit more memorable. One young man, with a wide grin and a selfie stick in hand, crept closer to a guard stationed near the main entrance. He whispered to his friend, "Watch this. He won't even move." The friend chuckled nervously but didn't stop him. The young man edged closer, pretending to poke the guard gently on the shoulder. In his mind, it was a joke. A small act of mischief that would get him a funny photo for social media. He had seen pictures online where other tourists had teased the guards and laughed at their unchanging expressions, and he thought he could do the same. But he had underestimated the discipline of the royal guards. The moment his fingers brushed the guard's shoulder, the soldier shifted slightly, not aggressively, but enough to signal that boundaries were being crossed. His eyes, sharp and alert beneath the bearskin hat, met the young man's gaze for the briefest moment. In that instant, the young man felt a chill run down his spine. The reality of the situation hit him. This was not a person who could be fooled. This was a professional, trained to maintain order and uphold a tradition that had lasted for centuries. Around them, the crowd watched, some in anticipation, others unaware of what had just happened. The young man froze, realizing that the moment of fun he had imagined was quickly turning into a moment of embarrassment and regret. He stumbled backward, trying to act as if nothing had happened. But the damage was done. The guard did not react harshly, but the presence and authority were enough to silence the playful chatter around him. He had crossed an invisible line, and though the consequence was not physical, the lesson was immediate and clear. The guards were to be respected, not mocked. Nearby, a family of tourists watched their children with careful eyes. The parents whispered about the importance of respecting local customs and traditions, using the situation as a teachable moment. They explained that the guards, though standing still and seemingly unapproachable, were part of a long history of ceremonial duty. Their presence was a reminder that some traditions were not merely for show, they carried weight, meaning, and responsibility. Even in a modern city like London, where freedom of expression was celebrated, there were rules and codes of respect that could not be ignored. Across the square, another group of tourists thought they could make the visit more exciting by trying to get the guards to react. They made faces, waved their hands, and called out jokes. Each movement was calculated, each laugh carefully measured to avoid getting caught. But the guards, trained to withstand distractions and provocations, remained unmoved. Their posture never faltered, their eyes never wavered, and their silence spoke louder than any words could. The contrast between the playful energy of the tourists and the calm, unwavering discipline of the guards was striking. It was a lesson in patience, composure, and the power of quiet authority. Some visitors, unfamiliar with the strict rules, simply did not understand why the guards could not respond. They approached, thinking it was all in good fun, trying to touch the bearskin hats or step across the boundaries. Signs were posted everywhere, but in the excitement of the moment, the warnings were ignored. A few even tried to imitate the guards' stance, standing still and stiff in an attempt to mimic their impressive discipline. While amusing to some, these actions were often met with gentle but firm correction from palace security, reminding everyone that respect and decorum were essential when dealing with tradition and ceremonial duty. As the morning wore on, the lessons became clearer. Each small incident, each visitor who overstepped, each joke that fell flat, served as a reminder that the royal guards were not mere performers. They were protectors of history and symbols of authority, trained to maintain their duty without fail. The crowd slowly learned that admiration could coexist with boundaries, and excitement did not justify disrespect. Even the mischievous young man from earlier now understood the importance of restraint, realizing that fun and foolishness could sometimes lead to embarrassment or worse. By mid-morning, the square had quieted slightly. Tourists who had initially tried to push limits now observed from a respectful distance, taking in the ceremony with a sense of awe and appreciation. Cameras clicked, but this time without harassment or provocation. Children waved politely, and adults whispered historical facts they had read in guidebooks. The royal guards continued their meticulous patrol, unshaken by the earlier disturbances. They moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, each step measured, each motion deliberate. Their presence was a living testament to the discipline and dedication required to protect not only a palace but centuries of tradition. What made the scene even more fascinating was the variety of people observing it. There were schoolchildren learning about history firsthand, families making memories, tourists experiencing a cultural tradition for the first time, and even locals who paused to watch out of curiosity or nostalgia. Each person brought their own expectations, but the message was the same for all. Respect was mandatory, curiosity was welcome, but boundaries could not be ignored. The royal guard's silent authority was a reminder that some rules were universal, and some lessons were best learned through experience. The morning ended with a sense of calm and reflection. Visitors who had previously crossed boundaries had learned, often the hard way, that appearances could be deceiving. The guards, who seemed almost statuesque, were fully aware of every movement, every sound, every challenge posed by those around them. They remained vigilant, not out of anger or hostility, but out of a deep sense of duty and honor. And for the tourists, the experience became more than a simple sightseeing trip. It became a story, a memory, and a lesson that would stay with them long after they left the palace grounds. In that moment, it was clear why people traveled from around the world to see the royal guards. It was not just about the uniforms, the ceremony, or the famous palace. It was about witnessing discipline in its purest form, about understanding the weight of history, and about learning that respect was more than a word. It was an action. And for those who had tested the boundaries, the morning had provided a gentle but unforgettable lesson. In the presence of tradition and authority, playfulness had limits, and every action carried consequences. As the day progressed, the crowd around Buckingham Palace thickened. Visitors from all over the world filled the square, cameras ready, voices full of excitement, and feet tapping impatiently as they awaited the famous changing of the guard ceremony. The young man who had earlier attempted a playful poke at one of the guards had now joined a new group of friends, cautiously observing the soldiers from a distance. The earlier embarrassment had left him wary, but curiosity and thrill still pulled at him. He was not the only one. Across the square, several tourists whispered to each other, daring one another to get closer to the guards, convinced they could test the rules without facing any consequences. It began with small acts, almost unnoticeable to those unfamiliar with the protocol. A visitor stepped a little too close while taking a photograph, angling the camera for the perfect shot. Another reached out to adjust the bear fur on a hat, thinking it would make a funny picture. Children, not fully aware of the rules, ran near the guards, laughing and waving. At first, the guards remained calm, standing tall and still, letting their presence speak louder than any words. But for those paying attention, there was a quiet tension in the air, a reminder that every move was being watched. Among the crowd was a family from Canada. They had traveled thousands of miles, excited to witness the tradition firsthand. The parents held the hands of their two children tightly, explaining that the guards were not only part of history but also part of a living tradition. They told stories about how these soldiers represented centuries of royal duty, how their training was rigorous, and how any attempt to disrupt or disrespect their position was taken very seriously. The children listened with wide eyes, impressed and slightly intimidated by the discipline of the guards. Despite the warnings and the obvious discipline of the guards, some visitors could not resist pushing the boundaries. A group of teenagers, thinking it would be fun, began to mimic the guards' movements. They stiffened their arms, straightened their backs, and tried to march in place, laughing quietly at each other's awkward attempts. Their parents tried to stop them, whispering that this was not respectful, but the teenagers were caught up in the excitement. One of them even tried to step forward to touch the guard's boots, convinced that nothing would happen. In an instant, a nearby guard shifted slightly, signaling a silent warning. The teenager froze, realizing that the guard's eyes had followed every movement. In another part of the square, a man with a camera tripod set it up dangerously close to the boundary line, hoping to capture the entire ceremony without obstruction. A small crowd gathered behind him, some whispering for him to move back, others excitedly snapping pictures as he refused to budge. The guards maintained their composure, standing silently but firmly. The man's stubbornness quickly drew attention, and a security officer approached, explaining politely but firmly that he must step back. For the man, it was an unexpected interruption. He tried to argue, but it became clear that the rules were not suggestions. They were firm boundaries that protected both the guards and the visitors. Meanwhile, the young man who had poked the guard earlier decided to observe quietly from a safe distance. He noticed a pattern: those who tried to test the guards were quickly corrected or removed, while those who respected the rules enjoyed the ceremony fully. The realization was humbling. It was not about the guards being unapproachable or unkind. It was about understanding limits and appreciating discipline. He watched as families, couples, and solo tourists admired the precision of the guards' movements, the ceremonial steps, and the way they handled the rifles with perfect control. The contrast between respect and mischief was striking. As the changing of the guard began, the atmosphere shifted. Drums beat steadily, trumpets sounded, and the guards performed their time-honored routine with flawless precision. The crowd fell into a hushed admiration, aware now of the importance of watching and learning rather than testing limits. The young man noticed the teenagers who had mimicked the guards earlier. They now stood still, mesmerized by the ceremony, realizing that trying to imitate the guards was nothing compared to the skill, training, and patience required to perform such duties. Their laughter faded into quiet awe. But not everyone had learned their lesson yet. Across the square, a tourist from another country thought it would be amusing to make a joke about the guards' serious expressions. He waved his hands and called out, expecting a laugh from his friends. To his surprise, the nearby guard did not move, did not react, but the silent intensity of his gaze made the man pause. His friends noticed his sudden hesitation and quickly urged him to stop. The lesson was immediate and clear. Humor, or mischief in this context, had limits, and the guard's discipline was absolute. The palace security also played an important role that day. Officers moved discreetly among the crowd, guiding tourists who were too close, reminding them gently of the rules, and ensuring that everyone could enjoy the experience safely. There was no harshness, only a calm enforcement of boundaries. The young man, observing all this, began to understand that the guard's authority was reinforced not by anger, but by respect, tradition, and careful control of the environment. The presence of order created a safe space for the thousands of visitors around him. As the morning stretched into early afternoon, more incidents occurred, each highlighting the consequences of crossing boundaries. One man tried to lean on a guard while taking a photo, joking that he just wanted a closer look. The guard did not react aggressively, but a security officer quickly approached, explaining that leaning on the guard was not allowed. The man, now embarrassed, stepped back, realizing that what seemed harmless to him could be considered disrespectful. The lesson, though mild, left a lasting impression. Around him, other tourists nodded, acknowledging silently that rules existed for a reason. Another example involved a child who ran too close to a guard, chasing a balloon that had escaped from a vendor's stand. The guard maintained his position, his eyes following the child's movement carefully. A parent quickly intervened, scooping the child up and apologizing. The crowd chuckled softly, not at the guard, but at the unexpected interruption. The incident reinforced an important truth. Even innocent mistakes could have consequences, and vigilance and care were necessary when near the royal guards. The young man reflected on the series of events. He realized that this was not just a performance, it was a lesson in respect, patience, and understanding of tradition. The guards had maintained their composure despite provocations, jokes, and mischief. They had been challenged in small ways, yet they continued their duties flawlessly, showing that true discipline was not about reacting with anger or frustration, but about remaining steadfast and composed. Each visitor who had been corrected or warned had learned a personal lesson about boundaries and respect. By mid-afternoon, the crowd had settled into a rhythm. Tourists now moved carefully, whispered quietly, and took photographs without disturbing the guards. Children listened to their parents' explanations about history and tradition. Families posed for respectful photos, and friends shared quiet laughs instead of daring antics. The young man, observing all this, felt a sense of understanding and admiration. He realized that the royal guards were not just soldiers, they were living symbols of heritage, representing centuries of discipline and ceremonial duty. As the day drew to a close, the lessons became clear to all. Those who had crossed boundaries learned that even small acts of disrespect could draw attention, embarrassment, or correction. Those who observed and respected the rules experienced the ceremony fully, appreciating the precision, discipline, and tradition behind every movement. The guards, silent and steadfast, continued their watch, embodying a perfect balance of authority and composure. In that moment, the young man understood a powerful truth. Respect was not simply a rule to follow. It was a way of appreciating history, culture, and the dedication of those who preserved it. Mischief, jokes, or playful challenges could be entertaining in other contexts. But here, at Buckingham Palace, they were met with a quiet but firm lesson. The visitors, whether young or old, experienced firsthand the consequences of crossing boundaries and the rewards of observing them. By the end of Part 2, it was evident that the Royal Guard's unwavering discipline had transformed the day for everyone. The young man and the other tourists had learned a series of lessons: patience, respect for tradition, awareness of boundaries, and admiration for those who dedicate themselves to duty. The experience went beyond sightseeing. It became a story they would remember for the rest of their lives, a story of authority, composure, and the power of silent, steadfast respect. As the afternoon sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the grand square in front of Buckingham Palace, a calm settled over the crowd. The early excitement had mellowed, and the tourists who had arrived that morning were now more attentive, more respectful, and far more aware of the unspoken rules that governed this place of tradition. For some, it had been a day of mischief and lessons. For others, a day of wonder and admiration. But as part 3 of this real-life story unfolded, it became clear that there were deeper lessons yet to be learned, lessons about respect, discipline, and the weight of tradition. The young man who had poked the guard earlier now stood quietly, reflecting on everything he had seen. At first, he had thought that the guards were unapproachable, and perhaps a little intimidating. Now, after hours of observing their unwavering discipline, he understood that their strength lay not in physical power, but in patience, composure, and a deep sense of duty. He watched a small group of children, who had earlier been running and laughing, now sitting quietly on the steps of the palace, listening to their parents explain the history of the guards and their role in protecting the monarchy. The contrast was remarkable. Mischief had transformed into curiosity, noise into attention, and impulsive actions into learning moments. Meanwhile, a young couple from France had arrived later in the afternoon, eager to witness the changing of the guard. They had read about the guards in travel books and online articles, but nothing could have prepared them for the live experience. They stood behind the boundary line, cameras at the ready, and observed in awe as the guards marched in perfect formation. Rifles held with precision, their movements synchronized like a carefully rehearsed dance. The couple whispered to each other, noting how every step seemed deliberate, yet effortless. Each guard, standing tall and still, seemed to carry not only the weight of their weapon, but the weight of centuries of tradition. However, as with every crowd, there were still those who tested boundaries. A tourist, perhaps unaware of the rules, stepped slightly over the rope that marked the edge of the viewing area. He leaned forward to take a closer photograph, smiling at his companions, believing it was harmless. Within moments, a guard shifted slightly, his posture remaining perfectly rigid, but the gaze beneath the tall bearskin hat met the intruder's eyes. There was no anger, no sudden movement, only a quiet, commanding presence that demanded recognition. The tourist froze, realizing in that instant that he had crossed a line. Security personnel quickly approached and guided him back to a respectful distance. Embarrassed but unharmed, he joined the crowd again, this time with a new understanding of respect. The young man who had been observing all day noticed another lesson unfolding nearby. A group of friends had been laughing and joking while taking pictures near the main gate. They were unaware that their actions, although playful, were distracting others and could have provoked a guard's attention. The lead guard, standing perfectly still, did not move, but the intensity of his unwavering focus was enough to quiet the group immediately. One friend whispered to the others, "Maybe we should just watch quietly," and the rest nodded, realizing that the playful energy they had carried into the square was not always appropriate. Even without verbal warnings, the guard's presence had taught them restraint and respect. As the afternoon progressed, the lessons became more subtle yet profound. Tourists began noticing small details they might have overlooked before. The shine of the buttons on the red tunics, the perfect alignment of the boots as guards shifted, the rhythmic cadence of the marching steps, and the way every movement seemed rehearsed yet natural. Each detail spoke volumes about the dedication and discipline required to maintain such a role. Visitors realized that their initial assumptions that the guards were simply ceremonial performers had been incomplete. These soldiers were guardians of history, embodying centuries of protocol and ceremony. A particularly memorable moment occurred when a young boy, holding his mother's hand, asked softly, "Why do they stand so still? Don't they get tired?" His mother smiled, kneeling beside him to explain that the guards were trained to endure, to remain focused, and to uphold a tradition that symbolized respect for the monarchy and for history itself. She explained that what seemed like stillness was actually an expression of strength, patience, and commitment. The boy watched in fascination as a guard adjusted his rifle with a smooth motion, maintaining composure without breaking the line of formation. The lesson was clear. Discipline and respect were often quiet, subtle, and yet incredibly powerful. The young man reflected on his own experience throughout the day. He remembered the embarrassment of being corrected, the nervous laughter at his own misjudgment, and the curiosity that had driven him to test boundaries. But now, standing among the crowd, he realized that those experiences had taught him far more than he could have imagined. He had learned about patience, awareness, and humility. He understood that actions, even those meant to be playful, could have consequences when performed without consideration for others. And he admired the guards not just for their physical discipline, but for the quiet authority they commanded through respect and tradition. Across the square, another tourist, a woman from Japan, had been documenting the entire experience with her camera. She had noticed several visitors who had overstepped boundaries earlier in the day, each receiving a calm but firm correction. She wrote in her notes how the guards' reactions were not harsh or aggressive. Rather, they served as subtle lessons in authority and composure. She marveled at how much could be communicated without a single word, how discipline could teach respect more effectively than any sign or warning. Her reflections captured the essence of what thousands of visitors had learned that day. Tradition and authority, when upheld with dignity, command admiration and understanding. As the sun dipped lower, casting a warm golden glow over the palace, a final group of visitors gathered near the gates. They were students on a school trip, curious and energetic, eager to experience the ceremony for themselves. Their teacher reminded them of the rules. Observe quietly, respect boundaries, and appreciate the dedication of the guards. The students watched intently as the soldiers executed the final drills of the day with perfect synchronization. Each movement, each step, each salute was a testament to discipline and the importance of preserving history. The students whispered to each other, inspired not only by the beauty of the ceremony but also by the lessons of respect, focus, and tradition. In these final moments, the young man realized that the day had been more than just a sightseeing adventure. It had been a journey of learning, a collection of experiences that highlighted the consequences of misjudgment and the rewards of respect. Those who had tested boundaries had been corrected gently but firmly, leaving them with valuable lessons about limits and authority. Those who had observed respectfully experienced the full grandeur of the ceremony, gaining a deeper appreciation for the historical and cultural significance of the royal guards. As the crowd began to disperse, the young man lingered for a moment, reflecting on the quiet strength he had witnessed. The guards, standing tall and composed, represented more than duty. They embodied the timeless values of patience, discipline, and respect. The visitors, now leaving with new understanding, carried these lessons with them, knowing that they had experienced something unique, a glimpse into the heart of tradition and the power of silent authority. Walking away from the palace, he felt a sense of gratitude and humility. The day had been filled with laughter, curiosity, embarrassment, and awe. He had learned that respect was not merely a guideline, but a principle that ensured harmony, understanding, and the preservation of something greater than oneself. Mischief and curiosity had given way to admiration and reflection. In the presence of unwavering discipline, he had discovered the true meaning of respect, the subtle art of patience, and the lasting impact of tradition. And as the gates of Buckingham Palace closed behind the last of the visitors, the royal guards remained, standing silently, watchful and steady. Their day had been long, their discipline unwavering, and their impact undeniable. For every visitor who had tested boundaries, laughed too loudly, or approached too closely, there was a lesson learned. For every respectful observer, there was inspiration gained. The palace, the guards, and the ceremony had offered more than just a spectacle. They had provided a story of authority, respect, and tradition that would linger in memory long after the tourists had returned home. The young man, walking away with a renewed sense of understanding, knew he would never forget this day. He had witnessed firsthand the power of silent authority, the value of discipline, and the importance of respecting both people and tradition. And in that quiet reflection, he realized something profound. The lessons of Buckingham Palace were universal, applying not only to interactions with guards, but to life itself. Patience, respect, and composure were qualities that could guide anyone through challenges, teaching that even in playful curiosity, there was room for learning, humility, and growth.